She kissed him because the night felt temporary, because the bar was closing and the rain had started again. Because he stood there and didn't explain himself. He did not tell her his name. He did not mention the building with his name on it 2 blocks away, or the driver waiting in the car, or the child asleep at home who asked every night when he would stop leaving. The kiss lasted longer than it should have, long enough to carry consequence. By morning, it would not belong to either of them anymore. What began as a mistake would harden into a choice, and once chosen, there would be no clean way back. If you value slow, grounded stories like this, subscribe quietly. These stories unfold best when given time. The bar was already shutting itself down when she noticed him. Chairs were being lifted and set upside down on tables. Someone wiped the counter with a cloth that smelled faintly of lemon and old beer. The music had stopped, leaving only the low talk of people finishing drinks they no longer wanted. She had stayed longer than planned. Not because the night was good, but because it was easier to remain seated than to step back into the rain. Her coat was draped over the back of the chair. She kept one hand on it, as if that alone might hold her there. He stood near the door, not in a hurry. He wasn't watching anyone in particular. When he checked his phone, he did it once, then put it away without reacting. He looked like someone who had already decided not to leave. She ordered water she didn't drink. He asked the bartender for the same and paid for both without looking at her when he did it. There was no flirtation in the exchange. It felt more like coordination than interest. They talked because there was nothing else to do. The questions were practical. Where she worked, whether she lived nearby. He answered less than he asked. When she noticed this, she didn't push. It wasn't unusual. People often talked past themselves late at night. Outside, the rain had started again. Not heavy, just enough to darken the pavement and make the streetlights blur. The bartender announced last call without waiting for responses. A couple argued softly over who would drive. She stood and reached for her coat. He did the same, slower. At the door, they paused because the sidewalk was narrow and people were still filing out. Someone bumped her shoulder. She steadied herself against the frame. He waited until the space cleared, then stepped out with her. The rain touched his jacket first, then her hair. Neither of them moved away from the doorway right away. "I'm walking," she said, more to explain her lack of urgency than to invite anything. "So am I," he replied. They went the same direction, without discussing it. Their steps matched for reasons neither examined. The city felt reduced at that hour. Storefronts were dark. A bus passed without stopping. At the corner, she slowed. This was where she usually turned. She could see her building from there, a low shape with one light still on. She stopped under the awning of a closed shop and shook the rain from her sleeves. He stopped too. Not directly in front of her, but close enough that the space between them felt deliberate. He didn't block the sidewalk. He didn't lean in. "Good night," he said, and meant it. She nodded. The pause stretched. Not long, but long enough to become something else. She noticed the quiet first, then the way he didn't fill it. The kiss wasn't planned. It didn't arrive with urgency. She stepped forward, then hesitated, then closed the distance as if correcting herself. He met her halfway, careful, his hands still at his sides. When he touched her, it was light, confirming rather than claiming. It lasted long enough to register, long enough for her to think of consequences and ignore them. When it ended, they didn't smile. She took a step back. He didn't follow. "I should go," she said. He nodded again. "Yes." There was nothing to exchange. No names, no numbers. She turned and walked the rest of the block without looking back. At her door, she fumbled for her keys, annoyed at herself for the small shake in her hands. Inside, she set her coat on the chair instead of hanging it. The apartment was quiet in a way that made her aware of her breathing. Across the street, a car waited with its engine running. He stood under the awning until she was inside. He did not check his phone. When he finally stepped off the curb, the driver opened the door without speaking. The car pulled away slowly, as if allowing time for a second thought. Neither of them reconsidered. The night closed behind them without comment, but it did not finish what it started. Morning came without apology. The rain had moved on, leaving the street rinsed and quiet. She woke before her alarm and lay still, listening to the building settle. Pipes clicked. Someone upstairs crossed the floor. Nothing in the room suggested that the night before had mattered. She showered, dressed, and ate standing at the counter. The coffee tasted thin. She poured the rest out without trying to fix it. Before leaving, she picked up her coat from the chair and paused. It was still damp at the cuffs. She considered hanging it, then folded it instead and placed it where it didn't belong. The walk to work followed a route she had taken for years. She crossed at the same lights, avoided the same cracked section of sidewalk. The city was louder now, filled with movement and purpose. Whatever had happened the night before felt smaller in daylight, reduced by repetition. At work, she took her place without comment. Her job required attention more than initiative. She answered questions, completed tasks, corrected small errors before they became visible. People relied on her in quiet ways. She liked that. It meant her presence mattered without being examined. A coworker mentioned a delayed shipment. Another asked if she could cover a shift later in the week. She said yes without checking her calendar. She always said yes first. It kept things simple. During lunch, she ate at her desk. She scrolled through her phone without intent, stopping only when she reached the photos she never deleted and never looked at closely. There was no message from an unfamiliar number. She hadn't expected one, but the absence registered anyway. The afternoon passed in pieces. A printer jammed. A client complained about something beyond her control. She listened, responded, resolved what she could. When she stood up after sitting too long, her back protested. She stretched and went on. On the way home, she stopped at the grocery store. She bought what she always bought: milk, bread, something green she might not finish. At the register, she hesitated when the total appeared, then paid without checking the receipt. Outside, she tucked the bag under her arm and walked the rest of the way. Her apartment looked the same as it had that morning. She set the groceries down and put things away in order, labels facing out. She moved with the assurance of habit. When she reached for a glass, her hand brushed the counter where she had leaned the night before. The memory surfaced briefly, uninvited, then passed. She cooked and ate at the small table by the window. A car horn sounded somewhere below. Someone laughed too loudly. The city continued without her involvement. After dinner, she washed the dishes and dried them immediately. She disliked leaving things undone. When she finished, she stood for a moment with her hands resting on the edge of the sink. The room felt too still. She turned on the radio, not to listen, but to fill space. Later, she sat on the couch with her phone in her hand. She didn't open any apps. She didn't type anything. She let the screen go dark and brought it back again. Once, she considered searching for him. The thought came and went without resistance. She did not act on it. Before bed, she emptied her pockets. Keys, wallet, a receipt from the bar, folded small. She stared at it longer than necessary. It would have been easy to throw it away. Instead, she smoothed it out and placed it in the drawer with old instruction manuals and batteries that might still work. In bed, she turned off the light and lay on her side. Sleep came slowly, then all at once. When she dreamed, it wasn't of him. It was of walking a familiar street and missing the turn without knowing why. The next morning, her phone lit up while she was tying her shoes. An unfamiliar number. No message. Just a missed call. She stared at the screen until it went dark again. She did not call back. She stood, put her shoes on properly, and left the apartment without the receipt in her pocket this time. The day waited for her, unchanged. But something had shifted, quietly, and it did not move back into place. He woke before the alarm as he usually did. The room was dark, the house quiet except for the soft hum of systems he rarely noticed. He lay still for a moment, eyes open, listening for movement down the hall. There was none. He got up anyway. In the kitchen, he moved with practiced efficiency. Coffee first, then toast, cut into halves and left to cool. He packed a small lunch he suspected would not be eaten. When he finished, he checked the time and went to the child's room. The door was already open. The child lay on one side, one arm flung over a pillow that had lost its shape. He knocked lightly on the doorframe. No response. He crossed the room and sat on the edge of the bed, resting a hand where the child's shoulder met the blanket. "Up," he said. The child turned over, eyes half open. "You're early," the child said, not accusing, just observant. "I stayed home last night," he replied. The child nodded as if filing that away. No smile followed. The child sat up and reached for the glasses on the nightstand. He waited, watching without comment. Breakfast passed in small exchanges. The child ate a few bites, pushed the rest aside. He didn't insist. He rarely did. He wiped the table after, even where there were no crumbs. When it was time to leave, he handed over the backpack and held the door until the child stepped outside. The driver waited in the car. He walked the child to the door anyway. They stood together for a moment on the sidewalk. The child looked up at him. "Are you coming home tonight?" the child asked. "Yes," he said, knowing the weight of the word. The car pulled away. He watched until it turned the corner, then went back inside. The house felt larger when he was alone. He straightened the chair that hadn't been moved and picked up a book left open on the couch. He marked the page and set it aside. At the office, people adjusted their pace when he arrived. Conversations lowered. Someone handed him a tablet with numbers already highlighted. He reviewed them while walking, stopping only once to ask a question that halted the group behind him. Meetings filled the morning. He listened more than he spoke. When he did speak, it was to clarify, not to inspire. Decisions were made quickly and recorded without discussion. He signed where indicated and returned documents without ceremony. Between meetings, his phone vibrated. An unfamiliar number. He did not answer. He placed the phone face down and continued walking. At lunch, he sat with two others who spoke about projections and timelines. He ate without tasting much. When one of them mentioned an upcoming event, he nodded and said nothing. The invitation was implied. His absence would be noted either way. In the afternoon, he stood at the window of his office and looked down at the street. People moved with purpose, unaware of the building above them. His name was on the front, though few looked up anymore. He watched a woman cross against the light, pause, then hurry on. The image lingered longer than it should have. He checked his phone again. The missed call remained unanswered. He saved the number without labeling it. The act felt heavier than it was. Later, as he prepared to leave, someone mentioned a late call from overseas. He took it standing, pacing a short distance between the desk and the door. His voice stayed even. He agreed to a compromise he would revisit later. In the car, the driver asked if he was going home or elsewhere. He hesitated, then gave the address he had memorized without trying. The car merged into traffic. They stopped a block away. He paid attention to this detail. He walked the rest of the distance alone, hands in his pockets. The building was unremarkable. He stood across the street for a moment, considering nothing he could name. He did not call. He did not knock. He turned back and returned to the car, the decision settling quietly. That evening, he came home when he said he would. The child noticed without comment. They ate dinner together. Later, he sat on the edge of the bed again while the child read. "Did you go somewhere else today?" the child asked, eyes still on the page. "Yes," he said. The child nodded, accepting the answer as complete. After the light was off, he stood in the hallway longer than necessary. In his pocket, his phone felt heavier than before. He did not take it out. The day ended without resolution, but not without direction. Something had been set in motion, and he had chosen not to stop it. He called the next afternoon. This time, he left a message. It was short. He said her name once, carefully as if testing it. He asked if she would meet him for coffee. He named a place. He added that there was no pressure to respond. She listened to the message twice. The second time, she stood by the window while the street below filled with people leaving work. She did not recognize the cafe he mentioned, but she knew the area. It was quieter than most. Clean. Predictable. She waited an hour before replying. Her message was brief. One sentence. A time that worked. The cafe was nearly empty when she arrived. It smelled like burnt espresso and something sweet that had been left out too long. She chose a table near the wall and placed her bag at her feet. When he entered, he did not scan the room. He walked directly to her table and stopped, waiting for her to look up. He did not touch her. He did not apologize. He asked how her day had been. she answered honestly, which surprised her. They ordered without discussion. He paid again, quietly, as if it were a habit he forgot to question. She noticed and said nothing. The imbalance did not announce itself. It revealed small signs, the way the barista greeted him by name, the way a man at the counter stepped aside to let him pass, the way his phone vibrated and he turned it face down without checking. She asked what he did. He told her simply, without embellishment. The words landed heavier than expected. She did not doubt him. She recognized the tone of someone who was used to being believed. There was a pause, not awkward, just full. "I didn't know," she said. "I didn't say," he replied. The difference mattered. She looked around the cafe, suddenly aware of the space, the quiet, the way time felt controlled here. She realized he had chosen this place because it was unlikely to be interrupted. The thought made her sit back in her chair. "Why now?" she asked. He considered the question. "Because I didn't want it to disappear," he said. She waited for more. None came. Outside, a car idled at the curb. She noticed it because it did not need to be there. The driver remained inside. The engine stayed on. "You could have told me," she said. "Yes, you didn't." "No." There was no defense in his voice. He did not justify himself. He did not soften the truth. That restraint unsettled her more than explanation would have. She finished her coffee even though it had gone cold. When she stood, he stood too. He did not reach for her bag. He did not assume the next step. They walked outside together. The car door opened without instruction. The driver waited. She stopped on the sidewalk. The afternoon light reflected off glass and metal around them. People passed without looking. "I can get home myself," she said. "I know," he replied. The driver remained still. She felt the choice pressing in. Not dramatic, not urgent, but final in a way that mattered. If she walked away now, the night at the bar would remain intact. It would stay small, contained, something that could be filed away and never revisited. If she didn't, it would become something else, something shaped by his life, not hers. She looked at him. He did not speak. He did not gesture. He waited. She stepped toward the car. Inside, the door closed softly. The street disappeared behind tinted glass. She gave her address. The driver nodded and pulled into traffic. Neither of them spoke for the first few minutes. The city moved past them in fragments. She noticed how easily the car slid through intersections, how other drivers yielded without knowing why. "You should have told me," she said again, quieter this time. "I know," he said. That was all. When they reached her building, the car stopped. He did not get out. He did not follow her to the door. The restraint felt deliberate now, practiced. She opened the door and paused. "This doesn't make sense," she said. "No," he agreed. She waited for him to say more. He didn't. She stepped out and closed the door behind her. The car pulled away immediately this time, as if the driver had been waiting for a signal. Inside her apartment, she stood without turning on the light. The space felt altered, though nothing had changed. She placed her bag on the table and sat down without removing her coat. She understood then that the decision had already been made, not when she stepped into the car, but when she chose to stay at the cafe after learning who he was. The night at the bar no longer belonged to itself. It had become a beginning she could not return from, whether she wanted to or not. The quiet that followed was not peace. It was commitment, settling in without asking permission. The days that followed did not arrange themselves into anything clear. There were no declarations, no sudden closeness. Instead, time compressed around logistics. Messages arrived without warmth but with intent. Times, addresses, short confirmations. She learned quickly what waited required. Sometimes it was an hour in a car parked one street away from where she lived. Sometimes it was standing by a window while he finished a call that ran longer than expected. Sometimes it was sitting across from him at a table set for two in a place that felt built for observation, not comfort. He was careful, not tender, not distant, careful in the way people are when they know their movements leave marks. Her life adjusted around this without ceremony. She missed a shift once, Then again, she offered explanations that were accepted without curiosity. Her supervisor stopped scheduling her for early mornings. The change was framed as flexibility. It felt like retreat. At home, her apartment began to feel provisional. She stopped buying food that required planning. She left laundry folded but not put away. The drawer with the receipt remained untouched, though she noticed it more often. They did not talk about what they were doing. The absence of language gave the relationship its shape. When she stayed late, he did not ask why she agreed. When he left early, she did not ask where he went. Silence became an agreement neither remembered making. Once, in his car, she reached for the radio. He stopped her hand gently before it touched the dial. Not controlling, protective. As if sound itself might complicate things. At his house, she moved carefully, aware of where she did not belong. The child watched her with open attention, not suspicion. She did not introduce herself. He did not offer a title. She sat where he indicated. She left when there was time. The child spoke to him as if she were not there, then occasionally looked at her, waiting. She returned the look without smiling. It felt important not to perform. Externally, things began to surface. A colleague asked her once lightly if she had met someone. The question carried no judgment. She answered no. The lie settled uneasily but did not unravel. For him, the consequences were quieter but sharper. A meeting rescheduled without explanation. A glance exchanged between two board members when he arrived late. A question asked twice in different words. He answered everything directly. He did not volunteer context. The room adjusted around him, not in defiance, but in recalibration. At night, when she stayed, he removed his watch and set it on the counter near the sink. The act repeated itself until it became noticeable. She watched him do it every time. He never commented. Once, she asked him something real. Does this ever stop being complicated? He looked at her for a long moment before answering. No, he said. The honesty did not comfort her. It clarified. The child began to mark time differently. Bedtime shifted. Questions sharpened. One evening, as she stood near the door preparing to leave, the child spoke without looking up. Are you coming back tomorrow? The child asked him. I don't know, he replied. The child nodded, accepting the uncertainty with practiced ease. She left shortly after. In the car, she stared out the window and noticed they were driving a different route than usual. She did not ask why. When the car stopped, she realized they were 2 blocks away from her building instead of 1. Traffic, the driver said. She believed him. At work the next week, her supervisor asked her to step into the office. The conversation was polite, concerned. They asked if everything was all right. They mentioned reliability. They did not accuse. She apologized. She promised adjustment. The words felt borrowed. That night, she did not respond to his message right away. She set the phone down and washed her hands longer than necessary. When she finally replied, it was later than usual. He did not comment on the delay. When they met again, something had shifted, not between them but around them. The spaces felt narrower, the pauses heavier. He received a call mid-conversation and stood to take it. She watched him cross the room and lower his voice. When he returned, he sat but did not resume where they left off. I may need to change some things, he said. She waited. At work, he added. She nodded. The statement carried weight without detail. She understood enough. Later, when she stood to leave, he did not offer to walk her out. He remained seated, hands resting flat on the table. At the door, she paused, waiting for something that did not come. Outside, the street felt colder than it should have. She walked the full distance home without checking her phone. When she reached her apartment, she noticed the light was still on from earlier. She turned it off and sat in the dark for a moment, listening to the building breathe. The silence was no longer neutral. It pressed in, shaping what could and could not be said. Something had begun to cost more than either of them had admitted. And still, neither spoke it aloud. She began to notice what he withheld. It wasn't affection. He gave that carefully, in measured ways. It wasn't time, exactly. He made time when it mattered. What he withheld was something less visible and more defining. He did not let himself arrive fully anywhere. She saw it first in small movements, the way he checked the clock even when there was nowhere else to be, the way he stood during phone calls, never sitting long enough to settle, the way his shoulders remained set even when the room was quiet. One evening, she arrived earlier than planned. The house was brighter than usual. The child sat at the table, drawing with focused attention. He stood at the counter, sleeves rolled up, cutting vegetables. He looked surprised when he saw her, then adjusted. He always adjusted. "She's early," the child said, not looking up. "Yes," he replied. She took the chair he pulled out for her. The action felt rehearsed, but kind. She watched his hands as he moved between the stove and the counter. He cooked simply, nothing elaborate. He tasted the food once, nodded, and served it. They ate together. The child talked about school, a project, a teacher who didn't listen well. He listened closely, asking questions that showed he remembered details from weeks ago. She watched this, quietly recalibrating her understanding of him. After dinner, the child gathered the dishes and carried them to the sink without being asked. She stood to help, but he shook his head. "Sit," he said. She did. The child washed carefully, splashing water onto the counter. He handed over a towel without comment. The moment felt domestic in a way she had avoided naming. Later, the child sat on the floor, building something that did not need instruction. She watched from the couch while he reviewed documents on a tablet. Attention split, but present. At one point, the child looked up at her. "Do you live here?" the child asked. She paused. "No." "Oh," the child said, and returned to the pieces. The simplicity of the exchange left her unsettled. When it was time for bed, she stood to leave. He walked her to the door as usual. The child followed, stopping a few steps behind. She put on her coat. He reached for the door. "Good night," she said to the child. "Good night," the child replied, then added, "You don't stay." The statement wasn't accusatory, it wasn't curious, it was factual. She looked at him. He looked at the child. "I don't," she said. The child considered this. "Dad doesn't stay either," the child said. The words landed without emphasis. No one spoke right away. He inhaled, then exhaled slowly. He did not correct the statement. He did not explain. The child waited a moment longer, then turned and walked down the hall. She stood with her hand on the doorknob. Her coat felt too heavy. She did not look at him. "I should go," she said. "Yes," he replied. Outside, the air felt sharper than before. She walked farther than usual before stopping. She stood under a street light and leaned against the metal pole, grounding herself with the cold. The child's words replayed without distortion. There was no metaphor to soften them, no interpretation required. In the days that followed, her behavior changed. She stopped rearranging her schedule to fit his. She answered messages later. She declined one invitation without offering an alternative. When she did see him, she stayed present but less pliable. He noticed. Not immediately, but with the same accuracy he applied to everything else. "You're pulling back," he said one evening. "I'm standing still," she replied. The difference mattered. He canceled 2 meetings the following week. The cancellations were noted. Questions followed. He answered them without irritation but with less patience than before. At home, the child noticed changes too. Dinner was earlier. Phone stayed in pockets longer. He read aloud at night instead of reviewing reports. The child listened without interrupting. One night, after the light was off, the child spoke again. "Are you tired?" the child asked. "Yes," he said. "Of work or of leaving?" the child asked. He did not answer right away. She learned about the question later, not from him, but from the way he sat longer at the kitchen table the next morning staring at nothing. That afternoon, she packed a bag she had not planned to use. It was small, practical. She folded each item with care. The act steadied her. When she finished, she placed the bag by the door and sat beside it. She did not cry. She did not rehearse what she would say. She waited. For the first time since the night at the bar, the direction of things felt clear, not easy, not painless, but visible. The child's words had not accused either of them. They had simply named what was already true, and once named, it could no longer be ignored. He noticed the bag by the door before he noticed anything else. She had arrived quietly. No message ahead of time. No adjustment requested. She stood in the entryway, one hand resting on the strap as if to keep it from falling over. The bag was small, but its presence altered the room. "You're leaving?" he asked. "Yes," she said. He did not ask when. He did not ask where. He stepped aside to give her space, then stopped himself and stayed where he was. The correction mattered. They sat at the table without speaking for a while. The child was at school. The house held a different kind of quiet during the day. Less layered, more exposed. "I didn't plan this to happen like this," he said finally. "I know," she replied. The admission did not soften anything. It simply placed responsibility where it belonged. She stood and walked through the house one last time, not inspecting, just moving. She returned a book to its shelf. She closed a drawer that had been left open. The actions were small and deliberate, as if closing out an account. He followed her at a distance. When she stopped, he stopped. When she reached the door again, he stayed back. "I can't keep adjusting my life to fit inside yours," she said. Her voice did not rise. She did not frame it as blame. He nodded once. "I know." The acknowledgement came too late to change anything, but not too late to matter. That afternoon, he canceled the remaining meetings on his calendar. The assistant hesitated, then complied. The cancellations were logged. Follow-up messages arrived within the hour. He answered none of them. Instead, he drove to the office alone. No driver. He parked farther away than usual and walked the rest of the distance, feeling the weight of the building before he entered it. The meeting was not scheduled. He requested it anyway. The room filled with people who did not ask why. They waited. He spoke plainly. He did not mention her. He did not mention the child. He spoke about attention, about erosion, about how certain roles once assumed could no longer be held responsibly. There were objections, practical ones, financial ones. He listened to each without interruption. When he finished, the room was quieter than before. "You're stepping back," someone said. "Yes," he replied. The word did not waver. By the time he left, the change was already underway, not formalized, but visible. Authority loosened its grip with reluctance. That evening, she gave notice at work. Earlier than required. Her supervisor looked surprised, then careful. "Is everything all right?" they asked. "Yes," she said, and meant it in a way she hadn't before. The question did not continue. They met one last time, in a place neither of them had chosen before, a small park between streets. No cameras, no staff. The child was not there. They stood on opposite sides of a bench, unsure at first whether to sit. Eventually they did, not close enough to touch. "I won't pretend this isn't a loss," he said. "I won't pretend it isn't a relief," she replied. Neither statement canceled the other. He reached into his pocket and removed his watch. He held it for a moment, then placed it on the bench between them. He did not explain. He picked it up again and put it back on, the habit already breaking. "I'm staying," he said, this time. She nodded. The decision was not for her anymore. They stood. There was no embrace, no attempt to preserve something that no longer fit. At the edge of the park, she stopped. "Take care of him," she said. "I will," he replied. She walked away without looking back. He stayed where he was until she reached the corner and disappeared into the street. The cost had been paid unevenly but honestly. What remained was not damage but absence, and absence, once accepted, changed everything. The change did not announce itself. It settled in gradually, like a rearrangement no one commented on, but everyone adapted to. His name still appeared on documents, but less often. When it did, it was no longer followed by expectation. Decisions were routed elsewhere. Meetings continued without waiting for him to arrive. The building kept its rhythm. Authority redistributed itself with quiet efficiency. He noticed first in small ways. The assistant no longer hovered outside his office. His calendar held open spaces that stayed open. When he walked through certain floors, people still nodded, but they did not pause mid-sentence anymore. At first, the absence felt like failure. Then, it began to feel like room. He came home earlier, not once or twice, but consistently. The driver was dismissed most days. He walked the last stretch himself, learning the sound of the neighborhood at different hours. Children played in the street before dinner. Someone practiced an instrument badly and without shame. Inside, the house changed shape. The child noticed before he did. "You're here," the child said one afternoon. "Backpack still on?" "Yes," he replied. The child watched him for a moment, then nodded and went to the kitchen. The moment passed without ceremony. Dinner became less structured. Sometimes they cooked together, sometimes they didn't. He stopped correcting the child's posture at the table. He stopped checking his phone between bites. When it rang, he let it ring. At night, he read aloud again. The same books, repeated. The child listened without asking for new ones. Familiarity mattered more than novelty now. One evening, as he turned off the light, the child spoke into the dark. "You don't leave as much," the child said. "No," he replied. "That's better," the child said, already drifting. He stood there longer than necessary, hand still on the switch. When he left the room, he closed the door quietly. Across the city, her days reassembled themselves differently. Without the job, time expanded in unexpected directions. Mornings lost their urgency. She learned which cafes filled early and which stayed empty until noon. She walked without counting blocks. She noticed details she had trained herself to ignore before. She moved apartments. Not far, just enough to mark a shift. The new place was smaller but brighter, fewer corners, less storage. She owned less and missed none of it. She found work again, eventually. Something slower, something that ended when it said it would. Her co-workers did not ask much about her past. She did not offer it. Once, while unpacking, she found the drawer item she had carried with her without thinking. Batteries, manuals, the receipt. She held it for a moment, then placed it in the trash without folding it first. The sound it made was ordinary, satisfying in its lack of significance. She did not think of him every day. When she did, it was without sharpness. More like recalling a decision that had been difficult and necessary, rather than a person she missed. They did not run into each other. The city was large enough to honor that. On a weekend afternoon, she walked past the bar where it had started. It was open early now, sunlight filling the space that at once felt temporary. She did not go in. She paused, then continued on. At home that evening, she cooked for herself and ate at the table instead of the couch. She washed the dishes and left them to dry. She did not turn on the radio. The quiet felt earned. Back at his house, the watch remained on his wrist, but he checked it less. Some days he forgot it entirely. The habit loosened its hold. One night, the child waited by the window, watching for him. He arrived before the question could form. The child turned and smiled once, briefly, then went back to a book. Nothing dramatic had been repaired. Nothing had returned to what it was before. But something had changed in the world. He stayed. She moved forward, and the night that was supposed to end remained exactly where it belonged. In the past, no longer asking to be carried.